On June on June 2nd,
It's like stuck.
Will it not go down?
Oh, there it goes.
There you go.
Like right about there. Yeah. I mean, their call is gonna be too far.
Take these off and just hold
And they
them.
know.
They know that.
Yeah.
Thank you. This is perfect. I love it. You're the best.
Okay, cool.
Hi. Hello, everyone. This is your 10-minute warning. So you can go back and get cookies, or you can find your seats, or you can use the ladies' room real quick. They also have a gender-neutral bathroom, which I think is very sophisticated. You can use that. I have. That doesn't mean anything. I just like the space. So yeah, hang out, grab your seats, and we're excited you're here. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited you're here. My name is Megan Finnerty, and I'm the founder of the Arizona Storytellers Project. I'm a reporter at the Arizona Republic, and I am relieved that the air conditioning is working and there's all the ice water in the world over there. So I would like to thank you for sharing your Friday night with us for this special Arizona Storytellers Project on Stories About Stories, a look at the life and legacy of Don Bolles, and a look forward at what investigative journalism is here in Arizona. At least, that was a little pretentious of me, at least as the Arizona Republic practices it. We're not the only journalists in town, she says, looking conspicuously around for other reporters. So with that, we're gonna kick off our evening. I would like to open by thanking, in particular, Dean Kristen Gilger here at the Cronkite School. They're our hosts this evening, and we're really, really, really grateful. So if we could have a huge round of applause. Thank you, Dean. I would also like to thank very much, we always are in partnership with South Mountain Community College. All of our storytellers at all of our nights, we've had more than 100 nights, more than 600 people have told stories on our stages right here in Central Phoenix. We are in partnership with South Mountain Community College, specifically Liz Warren and Marilyn Omofunke Torres. Liz Warren is my mentor. She's over here in the corner, because that's where the help sits. Anyway, Liz and Marilyn work with us every month to workshop all of our storytellers because they've prepared. They got all these emails from me. They had to come to a practice dinner. They've also endured phone calls where they talked about their feelings, and then I kind of was judgmental about how long they had and whether or not those were good feelings. No one likes me. But that's a really big deal, but that's only half the work that we've done tonight to prepare for you. The other half is actually on you guys. And I know what you're thinking. There's no booze. You can't ask me to work. But, you know, you can drink later. And I also know that it's a Friday night and you thought your work week was done. But oral storytelling is not totally passive entertainment. It's not like a trip to the movies. It's, I promise you, not like an inspirational speech, no Tony Robbins. It's definitely not like a TED Talk or a PowerPoint. No one here is going to try to sell you anything, not even an idea. Instead, it's like a visit. And like all visits, we ask that you open your heart and receive these stories, because that's kind of when all of the magic happens. When you receive the stories of others, you develop empathy. Hopefully you're a little more entertained, you're more moved. And so that's it. That's like 50% of the work, no big deal, but that's on you guys. No pressure. I would also like to thank, how many of you guys got brownies tonight? All of you, right? Yes. If you didn't, you can pick them up on the way out. Fairy Tale Brownies is a Phoenix-based company celebrating 25 years of baking gourmet brownies, and I'm proud to say that they've been our subscriber sponsor for the last year and a half. Tonight, all of you got brownies because it's a special occasion. Normally, only people who subscribe to AZ Central or the Arizona Republic get the brownies, but they were like, hey, we're giving you the brownies. So I'm super excited because Fairy Tale Brownies believes what we believe, which is that all great stories should end sweetly. And well, tonight we can't promise you that. And at most of our storytelling nights, especially if I'm talking, we cannot promise you that kind of ending. But if you visit their website at brownies.com, you can promise yourself all kinds of appropriate endings that mostly end with like chocolate and caramel. And so they've been our sponsor. We're really excited and we appreciate their patronage. But I also want to thank you, because most of you here tonight made a donation. Normally our storytellers' money goes to support the project, not to me personally, regardless of what you've heard. And the money comes back into the programs in order to pay for nice venues or, cocktails and food and other nice things. But tonight, all of that money is going to go to investigative reporters and editors, or IRE, or if you get the joke, it's called IRE, as though all investigative journalists are filled with ire. I don't know why I just made that sound like a pirate joke. I'm a features reporter, and I'm actually pretty guileless, so like IRE's not really my thing. But IRE is a tremendous organization, and anyone who chose to make a donation tonight, we thank you for that. We'll be taking all of the money, less nothing, like the Arizona Republic is paying for this event, and we'll be sending it to them in order. What they do is they train journalists to do good work, like file freedom of information requests. Investigative journalism is basically the most expensive journalism we do, and I'm not going to get up here and talk to you about it because it's not what I do at the Arizona Republic. That would be crazy of me. But I do want you to know it costs a lot of time and it costs a lot of money, and when you support investigative journalism or you have a subscription to the Arizona Republic, you literally pay the salaries of people who hold others accountable. With that, I'm going to introduce two people who are going to talk specifically about tonight, like sort of, they're going to cue up what tonight is about, give you a little context and scope, which journalists are obsessed with, for the stories you're going to hear tonight, as well as some of the storytellers. And I'd like to welcome up columnist E.J. Montini, oh, he needs a pen. So he's literally asking his bosses for one. If you are ever confused about who works for who at the Arizona Republic, I think we just saw it. With that, Ed, this is yours.
Oh, thank you. I'd like to invite up here with me Cheryl Crosby. Cheryl is the director of the Watchdog Group at the Arizona Republic, and we're going to chat just a little bit about what her work does and how it fits into the essentially into the tradition that the way we're going to bring it up is through Don Bolles. Yeah, you know, there was, I think there's a sense of the attack on Don Bolles was an anomaly in the United States, of course, but it's not so much in other parts of the world where journalists take on occasionally very dangerous attacks, and some of them are killed. But what is true of the people who do that kind of work is that they are all part of sort of a similar tradition. They believe in the work, they have a sense of tenacity, they have a sense of purpose. Cheryl directs the group, the Watchdog Group, inside the Arizona Republic. And in that group, they follow in the footsteps of someone like Don Bolles. But at the same time, times being what they are, they have to carve out new paths. And they have to use new tools because they're facing new challenges. And so I thought one way to start this off would be to simply ask Cheryl how you would describe the state of watchdog journalism today.
Okay. Do I need to use this? I would describe it as rebounding. It's no secret about all the cuts that have been made in the industry. And some newspapers, newsrooms walked away from this kind of work largely. But this community is really lucky and fortunate because leadership at the Republic knew that as other places were seeding this kind of work, that it was more important than ever. And they actually put more resources toward watchdog work several years ago. And I think, as Megan indicated about investigative reporters and editors, that organization has, many of us owe our careers to it. We have learned so much from the people that practice the craft and volunteer their time every year at trainings and conventions. A bunch of us will be going soon to New Orleans. Yes, we'll partake a little bit while we're there, but there's 150 different sessions where we're going to learn how to do different things, how to craft FOIAs, how to extract data from the internet, and things like that, tools that some were used during Don's time, others that are completely different now.
One of the differences in today and in the past is that the work that you do takes time, it takes patience, it takes persistence, doesn't happen overnight. But we live in a very, very important age, impatient age. And how do you reconcile?
You sit at your desk all day long.
Yeah. You want me to stand up?
Some of the people in the back.
Oh, okay.
It's a low stage.
But given the fact that, thank you, hey. It's actually
Never.
shocking that people still want to see me. That's fantastic. But those are probably the people with the bad eyesight. I get it. But really, we live in a really impatient age. Mm-hmm. So how do you reconcile the idea that the work that you do takes a long time in an impatient age? How do you get people to wait for the good stuff to come?
Well, many of our reporters our teams work on projects that will take over the course of time, a year, several months. But we are organized different than a traditional investigative unit, and part of that is because the demand and the need for bylines and content. And so because we think that our reporters will have more expertise. So they all have beats or areas where they are experts. So on water management or higher education or public corruption. And they are expected to do dailies sometimes, or breaking news stories, or mid-level enterprise. But all the time they're working on big projects that they pitch and we vet and we get a group of people together. So we feed the beast, so to speak, but we're also working on big, meaningful, impactful work.
One of the other differences between, obviously, a time when there wasn't the proliferation of social media,
Right.
which we have right now, and we have God knows how many websites that are so-called news websites and news TV programs, but they essentially do a lot more of stuff like I do, which is definitely not news, as most of you know.
And he sits on the wall from my office. He's just right around the corner.
I could be pilfering the really good stuff. But there's a lot of cacophony out there in the world, and how do you get these kind of reports, these great watchdog reports, to be heard over all that noise?
That noise. It's challenging, and it's a struggle, and nobody will tell you otherwise, and I think everybody's trying to figure it out. We're all experimenting every day with partnerships, looking for grants, and trying to find new audiences through social media and through live events like this, to let people know what we do, and hopefully that they will start reading our content.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank Cheryl, so we can get on with our speakers. But also, I think there's an element to this that's kind of cool. One of the joys of an event like this is that as we move forward, as it's always going to be, it's always good to look back and to honor the work done by people like Don Bolles, and to recognize that there are people following behind him. And when you understand what he did and how he approached his works, it helps you to recalibrate your own course and to make sure that you're still going in the right direction. And with that in mind, I think I'd like to bring up our first speaker. When I was a young reporter at the Arizona Republic, we didn't have a digital database. We didn't have things like that. And when you were pressed for a deadline and you had to get out into the field right away and you couldn't spend any time in the morgue, one of the other more seasoned reporters would say to you, just go ask Earl. Earl Zarbin worked at the paper for 40 years, was a wonderful editor and a great reporter, and he was one of a handful of reporters who was charged with writing the stories that had to deal with the Don Bolles bombing. So with that in mind, I'd like to bring up Earl Zarbin. Hey, you want this one?
You can stand at this, but you want to stay standing up so they can see you in the back.
Can you turn off those bright lights? No? Well, there's only one reaction that you should have when you can't see. Oh, good evening, ladies. What?
You're fancy. Okay. There you go. Now you look like a blues brother.
Well, it shows you how much I don't even know. I don't even know what a blues brother is. You know, and I'm going to tell you something. I'm glad to see there's a bunch of old faces out in that audience. Because, the technology is so past me up, I don't know where to start, begin, or end. All I do is call on a 4-year-old grandchild. They got the answers. Yeah, let me tell you. Anyway, first thing I want to say to you, I am pleased to be here to speak some words, not about me, but about Don Bolles. In the year 1962, I'm working as a night city editor at the Arizona Republic. I take a little vacation in October. I get back to work, and the first thing that the city editor says to me, and his name is Tom Sanford, he says to me that the Arizona Republic has hired a, quote, great new reporter, unquote. And he tells me it's Don Bolles. And Don Bolles turned out to be everything that Tom Sanford said. What I'm going to try to tell you about Don tonight is about what he accomplished in a small 11 or 12-month period, and the impact it had on the community, and the impact that, as far as I'm concerned, it still has on all of us today. I wrote myself a phrase when I wanted to say for sure that Don Bolles represented the best in journalism, exposing corruption in and out of government. I think that is so critical in everything that we do today. But the amazing thing about Don Bolles is that when he went to work for the Republic, he was assigned to the Capitol beat. Now, the old timers around here, and maybe some of the young people, will realize that here is a man that is reporting about government and what government is doing, and suddenly the things he starts to write about are the mafia, land fraud. What is this guy doing writing about such things when he's covering the government beat? And the reason is because the people both in and out of government are not doing what they should do. And what's that first thing? I think it's called honesty. No matter what job you're in, honesty. Don, in June of 1963, got a tip that there was a printing company complaining in a cross-complaint in a lawsuit that 3/4 of what the company received each year was kickbacks and bribes from a couple of tax commissioners. So what does Don do? He goes out and says, I'm going to find out about these tax commissioners, who they are, what they're doing. And 2 of the 3, their names were Thad Moore and William Stanford, are paid by you, the taxpayer, $9,600 per year. Think about that. Back in 1962, $9,600 per year. Yet, in 1962, these 2 men reported that Moore earned $60,000 and Mr. Stanford reported $40,000. Now, where did all that extra income come from? Well, Don Bolles reported, but he didn't know where the income came from either precisely. But he reported enough and told enough to the state attorney general and to the Maricopa County attorney, so that the Maricopa County attorney prevailed upon the Superior Court judges to call a grand jury. Don Bolles testified before this grand jury, and on October 10th of 1963, the grand jury returned 8 indictments of bribery and 1 of conspiracy to commit bribery against the two tax commissioners. Their trial was set for May of 1964. Now, I have to understand that back in those days, corporations were forbidden from making contributions to run for public office to anybody. In addition to that, in 1962, and by the way, neither of these men was a candidate for election in 1962, that if they received any contributions, they are supposed to report these to the Secretary of State. They reported not a penny. Also keep in mind that the Tax Commission, among other things, set the assessments for productive mines, utilities, and railroads. So now we got two indicted tax commissioners. And of course, Don Bolles hasn't got anything better to do in life, so he joins a fellow reporter on the Capitol Beat by the name of Bill King, and suddenly they are writing about flower funds. Everybody here knows what a flower fund is. A flower fund was money which was coerced, if you will, from each employee in the Department of Government he and she worked for, if that was what the commissioners and the people who were running it wanted to do. And the Corporation Commission was one of those places. Every employee was required, not by government, but by the commissioners, to turn over 2% of their gross income each year. State Department of Education, the Tax Commission, the Corporation Commission, all demanded the 2%. In the auditor's office, it was only 0.5 to 1%. This money, allegedly, because it's a flower fund, was to go to people who were recovering from illness, department people, or their families. In reality, the money was being used to help the commissioners when they ran for re-election. In addition to this, some of these commissioners were using their employees to circulate nominating petitions. And once the individuals were nominated, they were helping these individuals run for office. So you have Don Bolles, Bill King, and a third reporter by the name of Walter W. Bill Meek writing about this as well, so that when the Arizona legislature convenes in January of 1964, the House of Representatives spokesman says that the House is going to have impeachment hearings on the two tax commissioners who were E.T. Eddie Williams Jr. and A.P. Jack Buzard. And the House said if the two tax commissioners had not already been indicted, they would be the subject of impeachment proceedings as well. A few months passed, 13 impeachment charges against Williams, 8 against Buzard, because both of these gentlemen are Democrats, and because the state Senate, which would try these people on the impeachment charges, is controlled by Democrats, 24-4. And for those of you who don't know, back in those days, we had 14 counties, and that's why 28 senators. Today we have 15 counties. We have 30 senators. The senators threw out 10 of the charges against Williams. They threw out 7 of the charges against Buzard. And as predicted, they were acquitted. Along comes May of 1964, when the tax commissioners are to go to trial, but their attorneys file with the court a motion to throw out the indictments on the grounds that the indictments are based upon information stolen from the federal government, meaning, of course, from the Internal Revenue Service, and that any information developed based on this basic stolen information is therefore poisonous fruit. Don Bolles was called to testify. He was asked if he had obtained this information from an Internal Revenue Service agent, and he replied that he had not. He also acknowledged, however, that he obtained the information the same day he talked to the revenue agent. More important than that was the fact that it was revealed that he had a list of 15 people or corporations who had contributed money to the 2 commissioners. The Arizona Republic published these lists early in May, twice, and an effort was made, though brief, to try to find out why anybody in these corporations was contributing money. We had making contributions 4 printing companies, 6 mining companies, the largest grocery firm in the state of Arizona, and the largest utility. And I'm sure no one in the audience knows the name of the largest utility in Arizona. Oh, for those who don't, Arizona Public Service Company. Down from the Arizona Republic's front office came an order that the editors were told to pass along to the reporters. Do not follow up on this information. Do not ask why these corporations are contributing money to a couple of tax commissioners. And mind you, this is just a 1 year, 1962. You can go back, if we only could, to know how long did they do this. Things that we'll never know and really aren't worthwhile knowing now. On that particular occasion, being a night city editor as I was, it is one of the days of my life when I can say that the Arizona Republic forgot that it was a newspaper, that the people up front made a very bad judgment. A couple of days later, the 2 indictments against the tax commissioners were thrown out. Nonetheless, Don Bolles made a tremendous impact, not only on the community, but on the newspaper as well. Some good came out of all this reporting. First, in 1967, the legislature voted to outlaw flower funds. And then the 4 commissioners who ran for office were finished, although they didn't know it. 3 of them ran for re-election and were defeated. And the fourth one was wise enough to know I'm just going to leave office. Aside from that, for the newspaper itself to have a reporter on the Capitol beat, out digging up and coming up with stories that who know were there for the next 10, 11, 12 years, he continued this kind of reporting. And as a former journalist myself, I'm still a journalist, just a little retired. There is nothing prouder for an organization to have than a leader. And Don was a leader in helping expose the corruption in our government and our community. And if we don't have newspapers around to continue to do that, I think we're in trouble. Thank you.
Earl, thank you so much. Earl has not just made a lot of contributions as a journalist, but he also wrote the kind of the official history of the Arizona Republic, All the Time, a newspaper. And if you enjoyed this here, it's literally hundreds of pages of just like that. So he'll sign it. I'm kidding, he doesn't have copies. But Earl, thank you so much for your contribution tonight and generally. Now is the time in the evening where I thanked you guys to start, but now I would like to thank, you guys have your flyers, and you might have seen that we have a corporate sponsor for the Arizona Storytellers Project, which is really exciting because nice things cost money, like journalism. And we're really excited that Alliance Bank of Arizona has come on for 2 years now as our sponsor. And it's not just like they wrote a check and I bought new shoes, because that for sure didn't happen. Instead, I want to tell you what did. When people invest both their time and their money and resources in making Phoenix a little bit more awesome, really awesome things happen. So when they came around in year one, it was really exciting and we were thrilled. And a lot of people across the company that owns my newspaper, which is Gannett, they own USA Today and 108 other newspapers. They started to pay a little more attention, and they said, oh, you know, there's maybe like a lot more here than Megan standing up and talking about her feelings in public, which there is, but there's more. And so with the support of Alliance Bank, our Gannett said, hey, why don't we see if we can make this work in other cities? Maybe there are more opportunities for growth here. And so in September of this last year, we launched other versions of the Arizona Storytellers Project, but in 8 other cities. So if you have friends or relatives in Nashville, Louisville, Palm Springs, Fort Collins, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, etc., you can go see live nights of oral storytelling in those cities too, all supported by those newsrooms. Well, how it works is the newsrooms do the coaching. It's just like this. What's really powerful is there will be more than 60 nights of true first-person storytelling across the whole country this year based on what we started here in Phoenix and helped build up. And I'm not just, you know, that's really fabulous that Alliance Bank came in and supported us, but that's literally what they do every day because they're a commercial bank. And so people come to them all the time and they say, I have a dream about making my community more awesome, Phoenix. And they listen to them just like they listen to me, and they cut them checks and they help them make Phoenix more cool by opening up, obviously, places like, you know, I can't think of anything, sorry, but like, you know, art galleries, record shops, restaurants, cool things that make Phoenix more fun and that I like writing about. And so I just would like to acknowledge them and say thank you so much for your support of both your money, but more importantly, your faith in this project, because they help create this space for these stories tonight. We have 2 more storytellers this evening who are going to share with us their memories of Don Bolles. And before we do that, we'd like to share with you a brief news video that the newsroom put together. We'll share it online as well as all over, but tonight you guys get to check it out. It was made by our visual journalists at the Arizona Republic, and we're going to cue it up and share it with you right now.
On June 2nd, 1976, Arizona Republic reporter Don Bolles left the press room at the state capitol to meet a source. A note with the details of that meeting would later be found on his desk. John Adamson, lobby at 11:15, Clarendon House.
At that time, the front desk was over here, So there was the desk clerk, Judy Holliday, was behind the counter there, and across from her was a sofa. And Bolles, thinking that Adamson was going to meet him in the lobby, came in and sat on the sofa. After a few minutes, Judy Holliday got a phone call. She said to him, "Are you Mr. Bolles?" And he said, "Yes." So Bolles went up, took the phone call, spoke to John Adamson, then walked back out of the lobby to his car, and that's when the bomb went off.
6 sticks of dynamite had been placed with magnets under Bolles' car. They were detonated by remote control as Bolles backed out. As paramedics crowded around him, Bolles said the name of the man he was supposed to meet: John Adamson. He also said Mafia and Emprise, the name of a racetrack company he had written about extensively. Even then, Bolles was trying to put together the story of his own assassination. Bolles would die 11 days later. That same day, police arrested John Adamson and accused him of murder. Adamson would confess to police. He said he planted the bomb under the car. He said a man named James Robeson set it off, and another man, Max Dunlap, had paid him to do it. Adamson also gave a motive. He said a businessman named Kemper Marley wanted Bolles gone. Marley had been a recent target of Bolles' reporting, and according to Adamson, those stories cost Don Bolles his life. Police questioned Marley but never charged him. Marley always maintained he had nothing to do with the bombing. Same with Robeson, same with Dunlap. Don Bolles specialized in exposing public corruption. He wrote about the mafia, about shenanigans at the state's horse and dog tracks, about land fraud. His stories exposed the truth. They also upset some very powerful people. Adamson was imprisoned until 1996. He died 6 years later. Dunlap was convicted. He died in prison. Robeson's conviction was tossed out on appeal. In his second trial, a jury found him not guilty. Today, he won't talk about the case. After the bombing, reporters from around the country converged in Arizona. They wanted to continue the work of Don Bolles, to expose wrongdoing in Arizona, to show reporters could not be silenced. That group, the Investigative Reporters and Editors, IRE. Its goal, to help journalists uncover truths and root out corruption. It is that work that is the legacy of Don Bolles. On June 2nd, 1976,
Thank you. That was the voice of columnist and journalist Richard Ruelas at the Arizona Republic. So we appreciate his work as well as the whole team that went into doing that work at the Arizona Republic. Our next storyteller is at the heart. She was with Don that day at the legislature, but she's going to tell us a story about that afternoon and then what followed both in the newsroom and in her life after that event.
First of all, thank you, Megan, for calling and asking me to do this. And I want to talk to you all a little bit about how I knew Don and then about what happened. I'm a native Arizonan, and long before I went to work for the Arizona Republic, I wanted to meet Don Bolles. My parents read the Arizona Republic. I grew up in Globe, and my parents read the Arizona Republic from front to back every day, and so as a result, so did I. And when I got into high school, I started work on the school newspaper, and then I decided I wanted to be a reporter. So when I came to the newsroom of the Arizona Republic after graduate school as a young reporter, there were bylines that I had been reading ever since I decided to be a reporter that I had wanted to meet. And one of those bylines was Don Bolles, of course. You've heard Earl talk about the stories he was doing at that time, and of course, those were the things that appealed to me. Someone who was making a difference. And then there was Paul Dean, who's here tonight, and there was Walter W. Bill Meek, and a host of others. And kind of joining them in the newsroom was a pretty heady experience, sort of here I am. The newsroom itself was a pretty grungy place. There's a lot of paper strewn about. There were a lot of coffee cups half drunk sitting around for days, ashtrays and so forth. But it was also interesting because in those days you didn't have any of the security that you have now, and we would be sitting at our desk and people would come up to see us and they would want to be interviewed. They had a great story to tell, they said. One time I was working on a story on deadline, sitting, typing into my typewriter, making 2 carbon copies, as we did. And I felt someone behind me, and I turned to look, and here was a guy with a huge boa constrictor around his neck, wanting to be featurized in the Arizona Republic. So it was an interesting place. There was a big bullpen with a lot of desks sort of crowded in, and a little office off in the corner with glass windows that was the managing editor's, so he could kind of keep an eye on you while you were working. And it was a clubhouse too. I mean, a lot of people were yelling at each other across the room. A lot of people were on the phone trying to talk to someone they were interviewing. It was an interesting place. Don was seldom there. He was out doing his investigative reporting, and he would come back at the end of the day, talk to Bob Early in a hushed, Bob was the city editor then, talk to him. And who knows what those conversations were about, I always wondered. But sometime in the mid-1970s, as you've heard and read in all the stories that have been coming out about this anniversary, Don decided he didn't want to be an investigative reporter anymore. A lot of people say he felt unsupported. A lot of people felt that he was unhappy that nothing was happening. The legislature wasn't doing anything. The governor wasn't doing anything. And that he was doing all this work and putting himself at risk, and he was just tired of it. So he went back on the Capitol beat, and he also went on what we call general assignment, which meant you could get a story assigned to you about anything. And it's during that period that I worked with Don on several stories. One of the ones I remember very clearly was involving Gila County, because Globe is the center of Gila County. So Don came to me because he knew I knew those people. And the county assessor in Gila County, a woman named Marguerite Webb, had not been in the office for many years. And she was not the first work-at-home person. But Don was kind enough to, once I got into the story and started doing it, to let it become my story. And so that was sort of the first time we worked together. Another memorable time, we covered the Democratic and Republican caucuses at the Del Webb Townhouse. And Don took the Republicans, and I took the Democrats. And out of some fluke, the Democrats ended up being the story because they threw me out of the caucus. So Don and I co-wrote and co-bylined the lead story above the fold on the front page, and it was very exciting for me. But I want to tell you, as his daughter, something that working with Don taught me. He was, this was a time, I have to sort of set the scene. This was a time when women in journalism weren't universally accepted. When I was a student at ASU, in fact, I applied for a job on the Phoenix Gazette, a summer job, and the city editor told me women did not belong in journalism. They shouldn't be reporters. They would just get married and have babies. So that was sort of the era we were in. But Don never treated me either. Here he had a young woman reporter, fresh out of college, and he never treated me as anything but an equal. And I want you to know that, and I want you to know that also, because it meant a lot. When Jana Bommersbach is here tonight, and I took over, the men who were here in the audience who were there might not agree, but we took over the Arizona Press Club, and it had been a yearly raucous drunken fest every year. And we decided we weren't doing that anymore. We were going to do a seminar, and we were going to talk about investigative reporting, and we were going to talk about, open meetings. And Don Bolles was there, and he literally was there, and we had it at Francisco Grande, and he came down and spoke. So, he was wonderfully devoted to what he did. The last time I saw Don was that day, and we were together in Committee of the Whole in the House. We were both covering different topics, but for some reason, Committee of the Whole got out early that day, and nobody had to go off to their appointments. So we were all standing around, sort of kibitzing, and nothing that was very memorable afterwards, except Don looking at the clock and saying, "I have to go meet a guy." And he did. He went to the Clarendon. I went to lunch, and on my way back to the office, and that a reporter had been the victim of a bombing. And I have to be very honest with you, I did not think it was Don. I thought Don had left all that he was no longer involved, and that it was Al Sitter, who was another investigative reporter at the paper. When I got back to the paper, and I learned it was Don, there was a really kind of odd mixture of feelings there, because in newspapers, when there is a big story, there's a real adrenaline rush. It's an adrenaline rush both for the individual reporters and sort of as a whole. It builds, and everybody's assigned with a job. And you heard Earl say he was covering, or someone said Earl was covering, and the people who were covering were in that part of, working on their stories. They were sort of busy and so forth. The rest of us were stunned. Well, they were stunned too. I don't mean to downplay that, but we were all stunned. But they had to do that. We were feeling like we needed to do something. I mean, there was nothing for us to do, and we, in fact, had nothing for us to do on that. We had to do our regular reporting. Jana just told me that someone told her they'd seen a page from that day and the next day, and she had a front page story she doesn't remember writing. We all kind of kept doing that, but we were so frustrated that Jana and I and another reporter, Linda Vashada, decided that we would go that night to Durant's, and there was nothing we could do for Don, so we would go there and we would think about Don and drink a glass of wine to Don. And the reason that we picked Durant's was because every election eve, the tradition was that we all gathered at Durant's before we went out and reported. Now I know what you're thinking, we were not drinking. In those days, you could not buy alcohol before the polls closed. So we were getting together, talking about how we were going to cover this story, how we were going to connect with each other, because remember, there were no cell phones, and what we thought would happen with the election. And it was a good time, and it was always a good camaraderie there. So we did that experience together. But I got to tell you that in the coming days, as Don got worse and worse and eventually died, it had a huge impact, obviously, on everyone. It had a big impact in the newsroom. We had not only a great desire to know what was going on, and I gotta say that maybe we needed a little counseling, because those of us, it was almost the haves and have-nots, those who were covering the story, who would later get involved with the IRE, had some knowledge. The rest of us were all reporters too and wanted knowledge, but of course, the people doing this couldn't talk to us about what they were doing or what they were finding. So it was a very mixed time, and honestly, we could have used the counseling, I think. But the newsroom changed forever. There's no question. First of all, I talked to you about security or lack of it earlier. Suddenly, even reporters were searched when they came into the building, and they went through our purses and our briefcases every time, and we parked in a lot across the way, and the guy who guarded it looked under our cars, and it was definitely a time when everyone was very super aware of security. And of course, a lot of us never thought the bad guys would go after a reporter, and that ended. We went on to make it through this whole process as everybody did, and our hearts were there for you, though we couldn't really talk to you at that time. But once we moved on, once we got past all of this, we went on and did our jobs. But I got to tell you, looking back on it 40 years later, that I wish I could tell you that some great truth came out of all of this for me, that I went on and pledged to become a better reporter in Don's name, or that I decided to go into investigative reporting. And I know a lot of young people did that. That's great that they did that. But for me, what I learned from this experience is that really terrible things happen. And even when you have all the reporters in the world looking at them, sometimes the answers you get just aren't very satisfactory. Thank you.
The next person who will speak tonight is Bill Shover, whom I hope many of you do remember. Bill Shover worked for the newspaper brought in by Mr. Pulliam many years ago, and I read once in a story about Bill that his job, which he thought was really cool, was he was told by his boss at some point to do good. He became the corporate voice of the Arizona Republic. And I must tell you that he, in that effort, he failed horribly. He didn't do good, he did great. Just about everything that those of us take for granted as being worthwhile in this community, Bill Shover had something to do with accomplishing. It ranges from everything from the Fiesta Bowl to Compass to the 100 Club, you name it, the charities, the museums, all the great stuff that we enjoy now. A lot of it goes back directly to him or indirectly to him, or he'll take credit for it anyway. But among the other things that Bill Shover had to do was on that terrible day, he was the liaison for the company with the family. So he was there those 11 days at the hospital. So, Bill Shover.
One of the nice things about getting older, I'm not old, I'm just getting older, is that two nice ladies can help you, and Montini can lie a lot too, I'll tell you. Anyway, the memories that of this evening just stir me, and to see Rosalie and my friend Rosalie of those days and the family, and the things that happened. I don't quite know where to start, but I'm going to write down. I wrote some notes, and I want to tell you some things. First, I want to tell you that I got the first call from the police department about Don. We were very close to the police department, to the 100 Club, and some other things that we did, and so Chief Wetzel called me, and he said, Bill, it was about 11:35. One of your guys has been hit. You better get over to St. Joe's Hospital as soon as possible. I was at a meeting at Arizona Public Service, ran across the street, ran into the newsroom, and the radio was on. People knew something had happened, but they didn't know what it was. an occurrence. They knew there had been a bombing. They didn't know it was one of our people. Had no idea. And so I got Heine Milks. Harold K. Milks was the managing editor. Said, Heine, let's go. I got in my car. We drove to St. Joseph Hospital. And on the way, we were trying to think who it could be. And as Anthony said, Don Bolles wasn't on my list. It was Albert Sitter. Albert was covering labor in those days. He was always a target, it seemed like. And so we were protective of Albert through those years, but it was not Albert. And then when I got to the emergency room at St. Joseph, the strangest thing happened to me, because 11 months just before that, I'd been in the same emergency room. The same nun met me at the car because Gene Pulliam had had his stroke. And he died just 11 months before Don in that same room, in that emergency room. And I kept thinking back, my God, what a place of history for the Republic. So the nun took me in with Heine, and there were people working over Don, and I looked and I said, my God, it's Don Bolles. And I thought about 10 days before that, because Don and I and our families had sat at Arcadia High School at the graduation of our kids. David Bolles graduated that night, and my daughter Lisa graduated from Arcadia. And I thought, of all people, Don Bolles, because even though he was a hot reporter and always a target, we knew that. It just seemed like such a family experience. And then the next thing I had to do was, the toughest thing of all, was to call Rosalie, to call all the family, to call his mother in New Jersey, a sister in Wisconsin, and a brother who was a minister in California, and say, we've had this terrible tragedy, and can you please come in? So we rushed him in, of course, as fast as we could. The airlines could get him there. So that began an 11-day experience that I will never forget in my life, nor will Rosalie or anybody who was there. My job was to represent the paper and then meant Don. And so we set up a little headquarters there, because immediately international media came in, national media came in, wanted to know what had happened. All these things were just floating through our eyes. I took over Barrow's offices there and used it for my office to call all these families to bring them in. Then when the families came in, I had to greet them and tell them about their dad. But to see that sight of Don Bolles, it's a sight you will never forget. You can imagine what war is like, to see that tragic scene of a man who had just been blown apart in a car. The police were working over him. The lieutenants were working over him. Immediately they rushed him up into the emergency room, into the intensive care at St. Joseph, where there's usually 6 or 8 beds. All of them were cleared out because the police thought that something could happen after that. They thought that the ones who perpetrated the crime would try to kill Don again, so they sat outside in surgical outfits with shotguns, and that was what the room was. They had people on the windows. Everything was completely controlled. 1 bed in the intensive care, and that was Don. Nurses all over him. The sight was tragic, and I won't go into all of it because the family is here, but 1 leg was gone. One arm was hanging up, and there was nothing but sadness. The nurses were crying, and the same nun who had greeted me with Mr. Pulliam was the same nun there crying at the bedside. I'll never forget what a nun could say, and you won't believe this, but this nun said, Mr. Shover, when they get the people who do this to this man, before they kill him, I hope they remove a leg and an arm before they finally execute him. I said, Sister, she said, I shouldn't say that, but that's how I felt about the entire situation. It was tragedy beyond control. So the next 11 days, I sat outside there because I was to be a witness in case Don came awake. They wanted to have someone who could identify and get information. So one time they rushed me in. They rolled Don over. His eyes opened up and he looked at me. They were there with the tape recorders and they had notebooks ready to get information. And the police officer said, "You know this man?" And Don said, like this, rolled his eyes and rolled over and never came awake again. And that's what we had for 11 days. So we sat there always wondering what could happen. And I want to say some nice things about some people who were there. The administrator of the hospital, Adam, his name was Abner Huff. George Karras, who was the man who was in charge of all the expenses, and no expense was spared for Don's care, of course. And then the police came in. Larry Wetzel came in. Then he brought in Inspector Don Lozier, who was the officer in charge of the investigation. And Dr. Lozer, L-O-Z-E-R, was the head in charge of all the doctors. Every surgeon you can imagine came in there for every kind of expertise. There was nothing they could do. It wasn't because of the bleeding, it was the shrapnel that came off. Ears, face, and it was nothing but infection that came from the shrapnel. Rosalie, I hate to say this, I know it's sad to hear, but this is exactly what happened. You saw some of it, but it brings back terrible memories. So for the next few days, they were there, and I was there, keep rushing in and out all the time, thinking that he was going to come awake, and he didn't come awake. So I was coaching Little League Baseball at the time. And so as kind of an aversion, I started talking about my baseball team. Rosalie and I talked about it earlier. They were so bad, we won one game and lost 16 games that year. And you remember there was a movie at the time called Bad News Bears with Walter Matthau. We were the Bad News Bears, believe me, they were terrible. I'd come back after coaching, I'd come back late at night, about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and Rosalie'd say, "How bad were they tonight?" And I said, "They were worse than last night." And finally, after all those days, you know what Rosalie gave me? A statue of a baseball player, and she had it on the bottom and said, "The Bad News Bears." So that was some of the levity we had during that time. We had people who tried to come in to see Don. We wouldn't allow anybody in, of course, except for police officers and the medical staff. And all those wonderful people from the police who sat outside there, and we cried. We cried because the man was writhing in pain all the time. Even though he was unconscious, he was in writhing in pain. And finally, one person said, "I've got to see Don." And I said, "You cannot see Don." Well, she was the boss. It was Nina Pulliam. Gina died the year before, and Nina became the publisher, and she said, "I need to see Don." And I said, "Nina, you cannot do that." She said, "I'm going to see Don." So we insisted that she come down and meet her. I met her at the car, took her up to the room, and she looked at Don, and she fell across the bed and cried. And she cried and cried and cried and kept saying, "Don." We had to pull her off the bed. It was the most tragic thing I've ever seen in my life, to see this wonderful man and the suffering that he was enduring at the time. Well, we did everything to protect the family. We took Rosalie and the families and hid them out because we didn't know if there was a plot to kill everybody. They put 6 guards on houses. Mine was one of the houses. Albert Sitters, Albert Heine Milks, other people, probably Zarbin. And so we had to have the FBI come in. They would help guard us as well. The police were everywhere in the place, and it was just a tragic, tragic scene of seeing officers who were accustomed to things like this, but it was so tragic to see the families go in there to see Don and to see there was nothing that anyone could do except to pray. We did a lot of praying. We prayed hard. We became like a family together. We all were there together, holding hands and praying all the time for his recovery, knowing full well that probably was impossible. But anyway, life went on for us through those times, and even though we didn't have visitors, we knew that the world was out there crying with us. We had all the reporters from the televisions used to come in, and they would want us stories and stuff, and they would break down. Everybody would break. They knew Don. They knew Don as being an intrepid journalist, and they knew that he was one of them. So it was like they were injured just as well. It was not Don Bolles. It was the entire journalism family that was injured at the time. So that's what we endured during that time. And I just have to say that so many people rallied around us. People volunteered to be the lawyers for them for no charge. Bankers helped us. Everybody could help any way you could think of. The Phoenix 40 was newly formed at that time, and they were going to have as their first effort, they were going to have transportation as their goal. When that happened, immediately came crime. And who did we get? We got Ned Warren. It was the first one we got, and we cleaned up this town a lot. So even though that Don went, his memory carried on, and this town became very clean. The reputation that we had nationally as a place where you could come in and buy land cheaply with no water, it ended. Arizona became a place that people realized was a place that was safe for other people. So all I can say is that to you, Rosalie, and the family, you had one hell of a guy. He was a man that we all loved, we all respected, and a man that will always be in our hearts. And that picture at the paper of Don Bolles will always be there because he will always be a part of the Arizona Republic. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, can we have another round of applause, please, for Bill Shover? Thank you so much, Bill. We have two more storytellers this evening who are journalists today in our newsroom, but I'd like to take a moment and recognize, if you would stand, if you're an alumni of the Arizona Republic. I know there's more people. You called me this week. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You hang out. I'm excited. Thank you. Okay. Well, they've been in touch. Okay, hang on. I can bring this to you.
This lady who helped me here, this is Marlene Klotz-Collin. And I hired her 48 years ago to work at the paper.
But thank you so much, Marlene. Clearly, he stopped paying her how many years? No, I'm kidding. She's been working for free. Marlene, thank you so much. Our next storyteller this evening is Yvonne Winget Sanchez. And Yvonne is going to talk to us a little bit tonight. Our next two storytellers are going to speak about how Don's legacy is carried on every day. You guys have a little handout in which we wanted to put you in touch directly with the staff of people that Cheryl referenced earlier this evening who do investigative journalism every day at the paper. We literally are giving you their phone numbers. You're upset about something at the Ledge? You think something's shady going on in your neighborhood? Text them, call them. Again, my number's not on there, but theirs are. So with that, we're going to bring up Yvonne Winget Sanchez, who right now covers Governor Doug Ducey, but she's covered all kinds of interesting, shady, thought-provoking, and terrifying people at the paper prior to the governor. That wasn't a joke about the governor. Don't do that. Come on up, Yvonne. Save me from these people. You gotta stay standing. There you go.
2007, I started covering Maricopa County, and I thought, oh my gosh, Maricopa County is so boring. They jail people and do a lot of really boring things, and I wouldn't even get to cover the really sexy stuff because we had a public safety reporter, you know, who covered all those things. But that isn't really how it went.
Sorry, that's not, this is my fault. I should have made it taller. Can you believe it? I should have made it taller.
Oh my gosh, I never hear that.
I know.
The beat ended up being what one of my mentors called a chocolate vat. In 2007, I was heading into the newsroom. I was running a little bit late. I was on Camelback Road, headed towards 7th Street, and I was running late, and my editor, Tom Spratt, called me, and he wanted to know if I had something for the next day's paper. And I did. The Board of Supervisors, and this is the 5-member governing board which oversees Maricopa County, they were getting ready to approve a massive project. It was like a $340 million project. They wanted to build a criminal court tower in downtown Phoenix. And it came as the recession was really beginning to hit, and it came as the board was starting to cut back the budgets of all the county agencies, including Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio and then County Attorney Andrew Thomas. Arpaio and Thomas were not happy that the board would choose to cut their budgets as they were embarking on this grand Taj Mahal, as it later came to be known, for the judges. They claimed that there was a vast conspiracy, that the Board of Supervisors and the judiciary had teamed up against them to deprive them of their resources. And they would later claim that the Arizona Republic was part of that conspiracy. For years and years and years, we wrote about this conspiracy. We wrote hundreds and hundreds of articles. The county team worked day in, day out. Our phones were constantly ringing. The team was comprised of myself, J.J. Hensley, Michael Kiefer. Other reporters were brought onto the team: Craig Harris, Michelle Lee, Amy Wang. Our editors were Pat Flannery, Christina Leonard, Cheryl Crosby, Nicole Carroll, Randy Lovely. And we followed that story with every single twist and turn. We wrote about lawsuits that were flying back and forth as both sides sparred, trying to get the upper hand against the other. We wrote about the costs, the attorney's fees, the expenses that were spent to pay for the costs of these lawsuits, tens and tens of millions of dollars eventually. We wrote about judges who stopped having conversations, sensitive conversations in their chambers. They were afraid that those chambers were being listened to. So sometimes they would have conversations in their bathrooms. We wrote about the County Board of Supervisors hiring firms, consulting firms, to come in and sweep their own offices for what they thought may have been illegally placed wiretaps. We wrote stories about a judge who had been accused of bribery and conspiracy and obstruction of justice for his role in a lawsuit that involved the court tower. We wrote about federal racketeering allegations that were filed against the Board of Supervisors, the judiciary, budget officials, and others. We wrote about careers that were affected by the infighting. In 2010, as we learned that a federal grand jury had been convened to weigh allegations of abuse of power by Arpaio and Thomas, I spent a couple of days over at Maricopa County. I wanted to hear from the people inside the bowels of county government who had been watching this drama unfold up at the top. And these people were really, really scared. There was one guy who instructed his wife and his daughter to never call him in his office, at his office line. He was afraid that he, too, may be listened to. There was another staffer. He carried around his attorney's phone number in his wallet in case he was ever arrested or somebody came knocking on his door to ask him questions as part of an investigation, which was happening. There was another lady, she worked in the budget office, and she was terrified that her pool in her home would go green, and that would somehow give county law enforcement officials reason to enter her property without her permission. So we wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. And inside the newsroom, pressure was building, and we too kind of, suffered a different kind of consequence, as with any war, right? Chief Deputy David Hendershot, who at the time was Arpaio's #2 in command, met with JJ and I one day, and it was all on the record. And it was like an hour-and-a-half meeting, and he was really upset about the sheriff's budget. And he was really upset that the Board of Supervisors had decided to spend public money on their sweep for the wiretaps. They ended up not finding any. It was like he was begging us to follow that story. So JJ and I, like good reporters, what do? We walk out, we start making phone calls. Not too long after that, an editorial assistant took a phone call. It was Mr. Hendershot, and he was screaming and he was demanding to talk to the editor of the paper. He told her that he could never get the editor, but he left a message with her assistant. And he told her that now the Republic was going to be under investigation for obstruction of justice, and that we were making phone calls about an investigation that was forthcoming, and somehow that was not allowed. Our names would later show up in grand jury documents. Back then, you could post anonymously under the Arizona Republic stories. I don't know if any of you guys remember that. Some of them are really entertaining, some of them are really scary. One weekend, I was at home, and JJ and I happened to have what we thought was a pretty blockbuster story at the time. And my phone rang. It was my editor. Really never a good sign if it's a Sunday. My mother-in-law was in town. Someone had posted anonymously a history of mine. It was some parking tickets that I'd had. They were unpaid, and I'd gotten them when I was a younger, poor reporter covering Phoenix neighborhoods. I'd long forgotten about them. And she asked, "Is there anything else we need to know?" I was like, "No, this is it, So that next week, I got my money together, and I marched down to City Hall, and I paid those tickets. We started using drop phones, so these are those little prepaid phones that you can buy at a convenience store. We handed a couple of them out to some key sources, and we used them too to protect ourselves and to protect them. And then at one point, Craig, during his many conversations with Hendershot, was told that I was going to be arrested. And I was going to be made to do a perp walk in front of other media. And Craig and our editors, God bless them, they never told me because they know me, and I would have worried a lot. So I decided to let it go. They didn't think it was going to happen. But then the phone calls kept coming to Craig, and they eventually decided that they needed to let me know. So for a little while, I got reprieve. I had a baby. I took the full 3 months. And the phone calls stopped, and I stopped being so scared. I went back to work after those 3 months, and the drumbeat started again, and the stress of the beat was really starting to take its toll. Every reporter everyone was following the story. There was a lot of competition. The pressure was constantly there. And my husband had just moved here. He wasn't my husband at the time. My fiance had just moved here from Fort Worth. And he did not know what he was getting into. He knew I loved my job, but he had no idea it was like this. So we would keep our blinds closed because people were being followed at the time. We would look in our rearview mirrors often. And at one point, I don't remember the year, it's all kind of a blur, but at one point, I got a phone call from my aunt, Janice, in California. And I'm adopted. And I was born in Acapulco, Mexico. I was naturalized under Ronald Reagan. She wanted to write a memoir, and she wanted to include details of my early life. She cared for me. And we talked about it, and I had conversations with my parents about it. I talked to my husband about it, and then we later decided that we were not going to include it. I didn't want it in the book. It just wasn't worth the risk. So those were like really real things. That was the backstory as it was kind of playing out at home. And my husband, every day, was just like, oh, rolling his eyes. Why do you put up with this? Like, I don't understand why you want to do this and why you want to put your family through this. Why are you putting yourself through this? He wanted me to quit. He wanted to move back to Texas. He wanted to leave all of this behind. But in my mind, if I did that, if I quit because these guys made me uncomfortable, then they won. So we kept telling our stories. And because of them, some things changed and some things didn't. Andrew Thomas was disbarred. He can no longer practice law in the state of Arizona. Hendershot was fired for his management. Arpaio is still sheriff. I'm still a reporter. I cover a different beat. And every now and then I run into him, and he laughs, and I laugh, and we do that thing, that dance that politicians and political reporters do. And he tells me, oh, Yvonne, it's in the past. And for the most part, it really is in the past. But there is a part of the past that I still think about when I'm working on really hard stories. And I think about those days, and they're reminders to me that you can be afraid, you can still do your job, even if powerful people don't want those stories told. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne, very much. That was great. The next storyteller is Dennis Wagner, who pretty much began at the paper about the same time I did. And one of the best decisions I think that was made by a combination
Seriously,
of...
I have to do everything. Like,
I know, okay. One of the best decisions made by the paper and the reporter himself was Dennis going into the role of investigative reporter, because before that he was a columnist and he was way better than I am, and so that helped with the competition thing. But he is exactly what you look for in this kind of reporter. He is completely dedicated. He has tunnel vision. He works like a dog. He doesn't take no for an answer. He comes at you at all the time, and which makes it hard probably for anybody to let him pay for lunch, but he's otherwise a tremendous guy and somebody who has done a great service for this community in just recent years with his unbelievably great coverage of the issues that are going on at the VA, which is what he's going to talk about here. So, Dennis Wagner.
I'd kind of like to just have Ed keep talking. That was pretty cool. Thank you, Ed. What I want to do is kind of take you through the anatomy of a watchdog investigation. And I work just down the street at the Arizona Republic up on the 9th floor in a little cubicle. And we sometimes cover pretty exciting stuff and meet some really interesting people. But most of our work, if you were just watching us, you'd be bored to death. We spend a lot of time sitting in a cubicle, typing into a computer, doing internet research, and talking on the phone. But every once in a while, something pretty cool or unusual comes along. You stumble into it, whatever. So in late 2014, I was sitting at my desk doing all that stuff, and all of a sudden my phone rings, and it's our security guard downstairs. And he is telling me that somebody has just walked in and dropped off a packet, a brown envelope, and turned around and stalked out and didn't say a word. And my name is on it, and that's all that's on it. But this is like journalism, this is manna from heaven. So I rushed down there thinking, A, it's a bomb, or B, it's a good story. I'm going to hope it's the good story. And I bring it back to my desk, and I open it up. And inside, there's a bunch of emails and a bunch of receipts. And the emails and the receipts have the name on them, Sharon Hellman. And I know who Sharon Hellman is because at that time I'd already been covering the Department of Veterans Affairs scandal for a year or so, and she was the director of the Phoenix VA healthcare system, the hospital in Phoenix. And the emails and the receipts had to do with gifts that a gentleman was giving to her. He was sending her notes saying, here's the tickets to the Beyonce concert. Here's the tickets for your family, the $10,000 tickets for your family trip to Disneyland. And this gentleman's name was Max Lewis. And I already knew from my research that Lewis had been her mentor as an administrator at the VA in Washington State and in Chicago, where she previously worked. But I also knew that Max Lewis no longer worked for the VA. He had become a lobbyist. And finally, the documents that I had contained emails between VA officials and Max Lewis's lobbying company trying to set up meetings. And that company represented healthcare companies that were looking to work for the VA. So this is a great story, right? You just sit down, write it up, and you got your story. No, you don't do that. You've got a horrible problem. And the problem is, this came in an anonymous letter. You don't know who it came from. You don't know anything about it. So you've got to do your due diligence. And so I started trying to figure out how to prove that these were real documents, because maybe they're not. Maybe this is all a setup, and I'm going to be screwed if I do a story. Well, that scenario, now I'm going to go flash back to how this all started so you can run through it. In 2013, there was a public affairs officer at the VA named Paula Padine. And I'd never written a single story about that organization. I didn't know anything about it. But somebody tipped me off that Paula Padine, who was a decorated journalist and who was the coordinator of the Phoenix Veterans Day Parade for years, that she had testified in investigations at the Department of Veterans Affairs that were targeting officials there for very different kinds of corruption. There was a huge amount of misspending of funds. There was cronyism. There was a violation of privacy. There was whistleblower retaliation. There was all these things. She testified, and her testimony and others led to the forced resignation of the director at that time, who wasn't Sharon Hellman. It was her predecessor. Well, after her testimony, she was banished to a basement in the library at the VA with a job that had really no duties. And so my first story about the Department of Veterans Affairs was on this thing. And I wrote that piece, and in the process of doing it, I learned about a whole lot of other dysfunctional, messed up, screwed up things going on at the VA. And then, after that story ran, I get a call in late 2013, and it's a physician at the VA. His name is Dr. Sam Foote. He's a primary care doctor. He's a career VA employee. And he calls me up and he says, can we meet? And I said, yeah, come on over. So we sit down and talk, and he is so upset. He's got this combination of anger and of hurt and of pain. And he says, Dennis, you have to understand, they have a falsified appointment system here. It's fraudulent. They are claiming that they have short wait times of a week or 2 weeks for veterans, but it's all lies. It's all a setup. And they're doing it in part because if they achieve certain performance standards, the bosses get bonuses. And he says, but what's really happening is veterans are dying awaiting care. And I started looking into that, and he also provided me with documents. And one more thing he told me is, I'm coming to you because I've already been to the Inspector General. I've asked them to investigate. They sent people out here. They talked to a few people, and they turned around and left, and they did nothing. So now I'm coming to you. And I am so pained by this that I'm going to quit the VA. In a month and a half, I'm going to leave the VA, I'm going to retire, and I'll be on the record at that point. But I wanted to get it to you now so that you can start investigating. And that's what I did. I started digging into it, making contact with other sources. I filed a public records request with the VA, the first of many. And in it, I asked for some of the documents that Sam Foote gave me, because once again, I had to authenticate records that he was providing me. But in addition to that, I wanted a whole bunch of other materials. And this was the first of many public records requests, which we call FOIAs, for Freedom of Information Act requests. And it was also the beginning of a long string of stonewalling, where some of the records that I requested at that time, I still have not gotten. So now I'm investigating this story, and I'm working on it for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I can't seem to figure out a way to break it, even after Sam Foote retired. And then I get a tip. And the tip is that the House Committee on Veterans Affairs chairman, a gentleman by the name of Jeff Miller, is going to have a hearing. And during that hearing, he's going to talk about Phoenix. And I may want to watch, because it was going to be streamed online. And this was April 9th of 2014. So at the same time, I also learned that CNN was working on this story in the background and had talked to some of my sources as well. So I did two things. I told my editors, and I wrote up a story with everything that I had that was verified, that was clean. And then I tuned in the online video. And I want to read to you what Mr. Miller said. He said, "It appears as though there could be as many as 40 veterans whose deaths could be related to delays in care." This was the lead to my story. And so now we faced another dilemma, and that was, do we write a breaking news story and basically steal our own thunder, preempt our own project that I'd been working on for months and months? Or do we sit on it and risk having ourselves get beat on the story in our own backyard by CNN or somebody else who's watching this video? And I spoke to my editor, Pat Flannery, and others, and we talked about it, and we were hashing it over, and then it dawned on me that the image of Sam Foote telling me all about this and saying, they're dying awaiting care, and the VA won't do anything about it. And I said, we can't sit on this any longer, because they're dying awaiting care, and that's the whole point. So we published the story, and it, at first, it didn't have a big impact, and I think it was partly because Sam wouldn't talk to anybody else. And so the TV stations and other media didn't have a source to go to get it. All they had was this one sentence from the House Committee on Veterans Affairs and my story. And so for a few days, nothing, and then there was some TV reporting on it and a few stories around the country, and then CNN 10 days later finally ran a story. And at that point, when CNN did their story, then other media started picking up, and it went from a story to this madhouse media frenzy. And one reason it did that was because in the 10 intervening days after my story ran, the whistleblowers were coming out of the woodwork at VA hospitals all over the country. They were calling me and other reporters and saying, that's not just Phoenix, that's here. The same stuff is happening here. The patients are dying awaiting care, they're falsifying the wait times, and they're retaliating against anyone who speaks up. And so it just became a huge story. There were congressional hearings going on, veteran services organizations were going nuts, having town halls, and it really got huge. And one of the sources at the Phoenix VA who came to me at this point was another doctor She was a woman named Kate Mitchell, and she was head of the emergency department there, had been. And as director of the emergency department, she had reported to hospital officials that it was completely overwhelmed with patients because patients who couldn't get in for appointments were running to the ER. And they were filling the place, and she had a nursing staff that wasn't trained, didn't have triage expertise. So she had patients were dying, or patients were not dying so much. She didn't have any deaths, but she had patients were getting hurt because they didn't know how to triage them. And she had other complaints. And the way they dealt with this at the Phoenix VA was they transferred this specialist in urgent care out of the ER into a job as coordinator of a program for incoming veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq. Not even a medical job. And so she took on that responsibility, and she started working on that. And she discovered that the mental health care was the same problem as wait times everywhere else in the hospital, and veterans couldn't get mental health care. And she started seeing incredible suicide numbers, and it was driving her crazy. So she raised an issue about that. She raised a red flag about that. And the result this time, she came under investigation and by her bosses for allegedly improperly investigating an issue at the VA. And so she came to me off the record, and then as the story developed, Dr. Mitchell decided that she was going to go on the record as well. And so she told me about all this, and I did a story on it, and the day after the story ran, I was doing a follow-up piece, and I needed to ask her some questions. And I called her up and I said, hey, can you tell me this, and that? And she was like really cold and really stiff on the phone. And I thought, what's going on here? And she didn't answer most of what I asked, and I said, oh, okay, thanks, and I hung up. I sat at my desk thinking about it for a minute. I go, I got to call her back. And I called back and I said, Dr. Mitchell, did I do something to upset you? And she said, well, yeah, you did. She says, I just risked my career. I just had my name on the front page of your paper and in papers all over the country. And I'm trying to do something really good here. You call me up, and you don't even ask me how I'm doing. And it's a really important lesson that I learned right there, but it was also, it told me what this story was about. It's about the people. And it's not just, it's the veterans mostly, but it's also the people that work in the VA who are calling me daily saying, don't stop, keep writing. There's way more than you're telling. So I said to Dr. Mitchell, how are you today? And she says, well, I don't know if you know this, but when the stress gets too much for me, I go get an ice cream cone. And I said, okay, what are you saying? She says, this was a 2 Dairy Queen day. I said, okay. So I'm working the story, and I have to talk to, I tried to get interviews with Sharon Hellman at the hospital, and I finally got one after the thing was blowing up, and I went in to see her, and she says, look, Dennis, not only did I have no idea there was any wait time issue, and I don't believe that these things that you're hearing are true, but I didn't even know anybody was raising concerns about this. Well, Dr. Mitchell had gone through Senator McCain's office and tried to get the OIG to investigate the same things. So there was 2 different doctors at the hospital who were raising hell about it, and there were other people. But she told me she had no clue about it. And at the time she told me this, I had emails from an employee of the hospital, a guy named Damian Reese, who had written to Hellman saying, Hellman made wait times, so you'll understand how significant this stuff is. She made wait times the wildly important goal, the highest priority. Getting those numbers down was the highest priority of the Phoenix VA hospital before this scandal had ever occurred. And she had a big bulletin board at the hospital showing how things were getting better and better and better. And this employee wrote, we have to be accurate in journalism, so I want to make sure. He wrote, I think it's unfair to call any of this a success when the patients are waiting. That's unethical, and it's a disservice to veterans. And enough people knew about this email that an ethics consult was created. Hellman assigned somebody to look into this person's allegations. And it's okay. So assigned somebody to look into the allegations, and it was an ethics specialist at a hospital. She investigated it. She came back with a report that said, yes, Damian Reese was right. These numbers are not right. Not only that, but we need to tell veterans what's going on and try to figure out how to get them in to see doctors. And the response to that, the ethics specialist lost her job. So at this point, the story, my editors are saying, this is huge. They assigned one reporter to help me, then another, then another. At one point we had, I think, five reporters working on the story. And one of the things that we were doing most was talking to veterans over and over and over again. They were calling 30, 40, 50 calls a day and emails just to me. And I remember sitting down with one, the horror stories were just unbelievable. I remember sitting down with a guy, his name was Bill Webb. He lived up in Fountain Hills. He had kidney problems, he had heart problems, he had all kinds of ailments. And he was telling me how he tried to set up appointments and he couldn't get anybody on the phone and they wouldn't call him back, and he would talk to patient advocates, but they couldn't help him, and he was trying desperately to get care, and sometimes he'd have to go in to the emergency room to get care when it got too bad. And as he's talking, his lip starts quivering, and his eyes are glazed over, and he's 87 years old, and he's a very proud man, and I can see it's killing him. And he's a World War II veteran of the U.S. Army, and my father was 87 years old, and he was a World War II veteran, Marine Corps, but still a World War II veteran. Yeah, exactly. And I sat there and I thought, this is what this story is about. This is what I'm trying to write about. And I reminded myself at the time, as I go through this, I'm telling about a bureaucracy, I'm telling about politics, I'm telling a lot of BS, but it comes down to Dr. Mitchell and Bill Webb. So at this point, there was a lot of impact started developing. There were congressional hearings, investigations across the country proved that it wasn't just a Phoenix VA problem. It was a systemic breakdown in the VA. It wasn't just wait times and falsification of records. There was whistleblower retaliation and a broken culture throughout the VA, and there started to be fallout. Secretary Eric Shinseki was forced out of the VA. He was forced to retire. Congress passed a $15 billion reform bill that was supposed to expedite care to veterans at the same time that it created a system of accountability. Supposed to is what an emphasis here. In addition to that, there were all kinds of other reforms. And in the middle of all that, an Inspector General report came out on the scenario in Phoenix. And that report verified what Dr. Sam Foote had said. But in writing that report, the Inspector General included a few sentences that appeared to be intended to smear Foote by questioning his credibility, even though the report verified his basic claim. And it also included a really strange sentence, and I want to read it to you because it's so weird. It says, "We are unable to conclusively assert that the absence of timely quality care caused the deaths of these veterans." I'm not a medical expert, but I know that delays in care can't cause death. Cancer causes death, heart attacks cause death, pneumonia causes death. Delays in care may make somebody not get cured that could have been cured, and it certainly may make a lot of veterans suffer if they're not getting care. And I mean suffer not only in getting worsened medical conditions and pain, but I also mean suffer in the anxiety of not being able to get treatment. And this sentence was only treating this as, well, did they cause them to die? And I started looking into it, and I found out it was unprecedented. The Inspector General had never before used this standard to measure the impact of delayed care. And then I was able to obtain emails showing that this language was inserted in later drafts of the OIG report. In fact, it was inserted with pressure from the VA administration and from an official at the White House. That's how it got in there. And in testimony before Congress later, the VA officials acknowledged that while it didn't cause deaths, it contributed to deaths. The delayed care did. So Sharon Hellman, she was fired by the VA, and she filed an appeal. And the appeal went to a judge for the Merit Systems Protection Board, and she was charged with 3 things: wait times, failure of oversight. And he said, you know what, the VA screwed up the investigation of that so bad that I can't find her guilty of it, and she can't be fired for that. He said she retaliated against whistleblowers, and he said, yes, she did, but it wasn't so severe that she should be terminated. And the third point was she had accepted more than $50,000 in gifts from a lobbyist, and she hadn't disclosed any of it in her conflict of interest statements. All of a sudden, remember that brown paper envelope? Now it's back. Finally, I have something to pin this story on. I've got somebody confirming the documents, and I have all the details that nobody else has. So then we do a story on that. And as you guys have probably heard more recently, just last month, Sharon Hellman, she eventually was prosecuted for false disclosure on her conflict of interest statement. She was convicted, she pleaded guilty, and she was sentenced to 2 years probation, no jail time. And just this week, in a lawsuit that she's had pending, she is trying to get her job back as a convicted felon, and has won a small victory in that. We don't know what it means yet. So in 1976, when Don Bolles was killed, I was a journalist, not a journalist, I was a journalism student. And I remember reading about it because I was in journalism school, and it had a huge impact on me. And about 7 years later, I got hired at the Arizona Republic. And about, I think it was 15 years after that, I covered the murder trial of Max Dunlop, convicted of killing Don Bolles. That's how things move slowly in journalism. Our job is to stay on the story. Our job is not to find solutions, it is to expose problems and let others handle the solutions. We do that, and we can do that well, if there are citizens willing to come forward, and if we have a lot of luck, and we have good editors, and we're diligent. And we do it if we have a good reading audience, and that's you. And so I want to thank you guys for coming here tonight to listen to me, and more importantly, I want to thank you all for reading. Have a good night.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I want you guys to know, Dennis just sits at a regular cube. You don't have to genuflect before you get near his desk or anything. There's no little ropes. That concludes all of our storytellers for this evening. But before I let you go, I would like to acknowledge some of Don's family who's here in the front row. We have his widow, Rosalie. You guys can wave if you want, or would you wave? She's been practicing that wave. We have his daughter, Diane. Thank you so much. Right, you guys are here. Thank you. We have his son-in-law and his grandson here who have joined us. You guys came from South Carolina? Thank you so much for making the trip. A lot of what we've talked about here today is Don's legacy as a journalist. We've looked back and we've talked about the present, but I'd like to invite up my editor-in-chief, Nicole Carroll, and Dean Gilger to come up, and they're going to talk about Don's influence in the future.
Thank you. I agree with Dennis completely. Thank you so much for coming and supporting this. Thank you to all the tellers for your heartfelt stories. It's really important to us, and to see your support means so much to us, and I know it must mean much to you as well. So we want to talk about the future, Don's legacy moving forward. So Kristen is going to talk a little bit about News 21.
Yeah, I think in some ways what we're trying to do here at the Cronkite School is create that bridge between the kind of work that Don did and the future of journalism. So we have a program called News 21 for 21st Century, and it's funded by the Knight and Carnegie corporations, who got this started as a way to show that young people, journalism students, could do really, really great investigative work if given the tools, the time, the resources, and some really great editors. So for the past 10 years, we've been working on this at the Cronkite School. So we identified the very best journalism students across the country. They do a seminar, some of them remotely, some of them in person, our students in person, with Len Downey, the former editor of the Washington Post, and Jackie Petchel, who's a longtime investigative editor for both some major newspapers and television stations. And they spend the whole spring semester, they pick a topic, and they go really deep on that topic, because we feel like it's what we call knowledge-based journalism. You can't just jump out there and start writing about some big issue without learning a whole lot about it first. So the topics they've covered over the past few years are things like veterans returning from Iraq and Afghanistan. We did a big project on voting rights that was and voter fraud, which was quoted nationally. In fact, Obama referred to the results of that, which was, how much voter fraud do you think there really is in the country? Like very little. And we did that through public records requests in every state and almost every county in the country to come up with that database of voter fraud. They've also done last year marijuana. Changing attitudes and legislation toward marijuana. We banned any marijuana smoking during the course of that project. And some others. This year, the students arrived. We have 30 of them from all over the country, from Louisiana, from Texas, Florida, Maryland, ASU, of course. About 10 students of them are from ASU, and they arrived on Tuesday. They always get here right when weather hits 100 and then hits 110 and then hits 115. And they're working on a project that sort of revisits that voting rights project. They're working on one on voter participation and access in an election year. So again, they're traveling the country. They have funds for travel. We pay them a fellowship stipend so they can actually live and eat while they're here all summer. They produce this amazing project that's offered on the web in a very innovative, sort of accessible, interactive format with, searchable databases and videos and cool stuff. And then that content also is published throughout the United States. The Washington Post, NBCnews.com, Center for Public Integrity, Philadelphia Inquirer, USA Today, the Arizona Republic, all will pick up pieces of this work. So the students leave this experience, they're investigative reporters. They have these great bylines and a passion to go out and make a difference with this kind of work. And that's what we think is so important in preserving Don Bolles' legacy.
That's great. It's an amazing program, and it's one we want to support. So tonight we're announcing we're creating the Don Bolles Fellowship for News 21, and we'll be funding one of these students moving forward. In addition, we contacted IRE, and they are giving the student a scholarship to the convention each year, and they're giving them a free membership so they can learn all those tools that Cheryl talked about as well. Yeah. So before we did this, I called Rosalie to make sure it was okay, to make sure this would be something that you would want and the family would want, and we also interviewed her for a story. And with her permission, I want to tell you what she said. Rosalie said, "I hope it can become an incentive for upcoming journalists. I think it's a wonderful tribute to Don, frankly, because after all, he gave his life for journalism." He just had a sense of right and wrong. He had such integrity. He was very passionate about exposing the truth and what was really happening. That was his passion, and he was so good at it. It was his undoing. But I still think he would be very proud to have a fund like that named after him. I think because the investigative part is so important. We also asked Rosalie, what would you tell the student who gets this fellowship? Because when they get it, in fact, it'll say Don Bolles Fellow on their byline. So in all these papers and all these websites across the country, it'll say the Don Bolles Fellow. So what do you want the student to know? And here's what Rosalie said. I would want them to have a passion for the truth, because I know how Don felt about it. And they would have to have integrity, commitment, the passion, the dedication. It takes a lot of dedication. I love what you said about passion for the truth, because everybody in this room, we share that passion for the truth. Every journalist at the Arizona Republic, we share that passion for the truth, and we're really proud and honored to nurture and support that in journalists moving forward.
Did I age you out there?
You did, a little bit.
It has to be the first time anyone aged Megan from a microphone, really.
See you at the bar. Thank you so much. Dean Gilger, thank you so much. Nicole?
Yes, and thank you all for coming. It's been a really great experience, and really, feel free to contact all of us at any time. We love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.